Hello and welcome to TelecomTV and to another of our Two Pint problems. Actually, we've got 3 pints in front of us, but welcome back to Baker Street. Welcome to the Allsop Arms where we do 2 pints. I am joined as usual on my left here, Ian Scales, my colleague, managing editor of TelecomTV, and on my right, Martyn Taylor, the CTO of Metaswitch. Welcome back both. Let's begin at the beginning. Martyn, AT&T is working on its own SDN controller and expects to have it operational this year. Now, is that a sign that telcos, or at least the tier 1 telcos, are once again moving towards taking control of the technology, especially where something as important as SDN is concerned? If that turns out to be the case, what will it mean for the vendors? Is it time for them to start worrying?
Well, I think it's worth remembering that the big telcos have always done quite a bit of software work. Traditionally, it's been more in the sort of IT space, integrating their systems into their management arrangements. But when you think about what SDN means to a lot of these network operators, it's primarily about provisioning services more quickly and more dynamically. So think of it as a kind of logical next phase from the IT integration for provisioning in a more manual way into a more automated mode of things. Now, I'm not entirely sure I know what AT&T in particular is planning to do here and where they draw the line between provisioning and SDN network control. I mean, again, it's worth remembering that there are open source SDN controllers out there, and for all I know, they may be planning to sort of meet that halfway, making use, for example, of open daylight. But this has always been a possibility for network operators. Historically, they did software development around intelligent networks, for example, adding extra services on top of telephone switches. And at the time, that was seen as potentially a threat to vendors. But a telco is always going to do a sensible, logical make-buy decision. Either they can make their own software or they can go and buy it. And they're not going to go and reinvent a wheel that they can get off the shelf from another vendor. But if they see a gap and they see an opportunity and they've got the skills, then yeah, why not?
Yeah. Well, I suppose too, they might see the SDN controller as more of a strategic thing that they can use as a differentiator, or even if it's only to themselves. They've got their own SDN controller, which means that they can maybe say, well, we've got a better network than the other guy. Is that?
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, I think one of the observations they would make about NFV and SDN is that this gives them more power to differentiate when they've been. If they're competing with other telcos who are all buying the same equipment from the same small number of vendors, then how do you differentiate your services? So this is definitely one way that they can flex their muscles, if you like, and move ahead of the rest of the pack.
Yes, and I suppose it's the old thing too about buy or collaborate is you don't want to be held over the barrel by one or more vendors if you're a bigger telco, do you?
Sure.
It's quite a good idea too.
And again, they're learning lessons from looking across at the over-the-top service providers.
Yeah.
All of whom write, pretty much all their software in-house, and that's what's given them the power and the low cost base to be as successful as they have been.
That's the differentiating, and that creates the barrier to entry for anybody who's going to come in against them too. I mean, that's their proprietary software.
Sure, because only the biggest network operators are going to have the resources to do that kind of development.
I mean, obviously put Google well ahead in terms of search engines, didn't it, for several years, although things like Bing and so on are catching up now, but that's a huge help for them that they had their own proprietary stack for.
Sure. They built a company on that.
Cloud. They built a cloud on it. Yeah. And I suppose the same logic is occurring to the telcos. Where in many ways, it's going to be a much more competitive area when you think about large, hyperscale data centers and so on, which is where a lot of the battle's going to be, isn't it, between the different telcos? So you've really got to be able to prove that you can control the technology, and you've got to, you're ahead of the next guy. I've often wondered, this is a naughty thought really, but I've often wondered whether they obviously the big search is on for agility. And I was talking about agility, and that's understandable. Especially with the OTT providers coming in, they've seen that they get to market faster and so on. But it's always a technological solution for agility. Usually, they say, well, if only we had that piece of technology, we would be much more agile. I think a lot of it's nothing to do with the technology, though. A lot of it's to do with the business model and the mindset. And you wonder, even when you've got all the technology in, you still might not be able to move fast enough to
Yeah, I mean, I
stuff.
think I hear what you say, but I mean, to be fair to the telcos, I think by bringing in-house some of the pieces of the solution, becoming more of an integrator in their own right, and just having greater ownership of the technology and not being so dependent on third parties, they will be able to become more agile. Now, of course, there's a cultural mindset. When you've been used to a certain way of doing things, it requires some adaptation of those processes to take advantage of the newfound freedom, if you like, that they've got to innovate in-house and do stuff more quickly.
The second question, Martyn, what about WebRTC? Do you think it might be capable of disrupting both voice over LTE, VoLTE and IMS in terms of strategic decision making? And do you think some telcos will hold back and wait to see if or how WebRTC actually pans out? What's the state of play with it?
I'm not with the WebRTC hype, I have to say. I mean, there are lots of ways that WebRTC will do useful stuff for people generally, but little of it has much to do with telcos. So the idea that you can have some sort of real-time voice and video session while you're playing massively multiplayer games and those kinds of things, all very useful and interesting, but it's not taking minutes away from traditional voice networks, that kind of thing. It's another channel of communication and another just new thing. Certainly there are some sort of areas of competition around the edges. I mean, there's been quite a lot of talk about using WebRTC for business video conferencing and desktop sharing and collaboration. So that it could certainly impact on some of the unified communications offerings that some telcos, and some of the telcos will probably take advantage of WebRTC in that space. And I think we also see some use cases around people making voice and video calls from web pages to call centers, and traditionally call center traffic has gone through telcos, and there's an opportunity there for telcos to extend their 0800 or 1-800 kind of call center style services to embrace WebRTC. So there's an opportunity there. WebRTC, of course, is about making voice and video calls from browsers, but it's also about technology that allows you to build more portable voice and video apps for smartphones and so on. But you know what? It's always been possible to build those apps. The fact that there's a technology that allows you to build them a little bit more quickly and make them a little bit more portable is not a game changer in our view.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Well, I kind of got carried away by the hype, I suppose. I was slightly more impressed by it than Martyn is. I think what telcos are looking at it for is it's a way on the big problem they've got is how do I still run my minutes business and all my well understood telephony and other services, but add a little bit of this new stuff on the side. And WebRTC is seen as a way of being able to do that. So you might be able to support a WebRTC environment. You might be able to support signaling from voice calls coming in there. It's a way of enhancing your established voice business, maybe with business users and so on, where they've got instant calling from their web page or something.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think telcos can look at WebRTC in a couple of ways. I mean, obviously as a threat, potentially as a way of building a telco OTT style service. Yes. Although I think telco OTT doesn't seem to be getting the traction that a lot of people thought it would a year or so ago.
That's true.
But you're right. I mean, as an additional access mechanism for existing voice services, of course. I mean, it goes without saying. But let's face it. I mean, there are plenty of different ways that you can access voice services from devices like PCs and tablets and smartphones already, based on downloadable apps.
Yes.
And those apps typically have much more function than you could deploy in WebRTC. So of course, but one of the things people forget is that you can make outbound calls from a browser with a WebRTC page, but you can't receive inbound calls when you're doing something else because the browser isn't alive unless it happens to be pointed at that particular page all the time. So it's not as functional as a native app that's designed to do telephony.
Wouldn't there be a way of signalling that you're going to send somebody, have a voice conversation?
Well, not without an installed app.
Right.
And people aren't that resistant to installing apps. I mean, how many people have installed Skype on their PCs, for example? That's why I think WebRTC what it promises is voice and video communications without the need to install an app. And all I'm questioning is whether that's a fundamental game changer,
Right.
given that there appears to have been limited resistance to installing apps.
Yeah, you're probably right, Martyn. I probably get a little bit over enthusiastic about this, but I think in some ways it could be like a toolkit for people who want to be really innovative with voice. Because it makes it very flexible and very fluid, doesn't it?
I think it'll definitely spawn some interesting new
Yeah.
use cases that we can't even imagine today.
It might even be game changers.
Possibly. Well, that's it for this edition of Two Pint Problem here from sunny Baker Street, or not so sunny Baker Street. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Cheers, chaps.
Cheers.
Yeah.